Capitulo either words that moved the first time the words changed. They spelled my name. I remember the chapel was empty, silent except for the hiss of the candle by the altar. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort its watchers. I was supposed to be dusting the old relic cabinet, but something beneath the altar drew my attention. A thin, leather-bound book, forgotten, almost breathing under the cloth. It wasn't like any gospel I'd ever seen. The cover was cracked like dry skin, and on its spine, the gold letters had faded into a bruise-colored blur. When I opened it, the pages gave a faint sigh, like something relieved to be touched again. At first, the verses looked ordinary. The same blessings, the same parables. But then the ink began to move, not spill, not smear. Move. The letters slid across the page, crawling like tiny black insects, forming new sentences. My breath caught. The flickering candlelight made it worse each time. The flame bent. The gospel rewrote itself. Then, as if a hand pressed invisible fingers against the page, I saw the words, Miriam, watches from the altar. Her hands tremble with unbelief. I dropped the book. It hit the floor with a wet sound, as if it had landed in something alive. My name Miriam was still there when I picked it up again, written in fresh, glistening ink. I ran my fingers over it. The letters were warm. That night I couldn't sleep. The memory of the shifting words burned behind my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them dancing, changing, rearranging, whispering in a language that didn't exist. By morning, I convinced myself it was exhaustion. Faith demands reason sometimes, even when reason trembles. I decided to check the book again, to prove to myself it was only imagination. But when I opened it, the gospel was different. That where there should have been Genesis, there was something called the beginning of flesh. The first verse read, and the word looked upon the believer, and desired to be seen. My hands shook. The letters glowed faintly, pulsing like veins beneath thin skin. Then I noticed something new on the bottom margin, written in smaller script, almost shyly, read me again tonight, when they all sleep. A cold wind moved through the chapel, though the windows were sealed. I slammed the gospel shut and pressed it to my chest. As if holding it could quiet it, it didn't. That night, long after the others had fallen asleep, I heard the sound again, the whisper of pages turning themselves. From the corner of my cell, the gospel waited on the desk, open to a blank page. Slowly, black lines began to appear, letters forming, then words. It wasn't Latin this time. It wasn't even holy. It was a prayer, written in my handwriting. And it ended with a sentence I will never forget. Do not fear the word, Miriam. It fears you. Capítulo 2. The gospel of the flesh. I didn't mean to read it again. God knows I didn't, but temptation doesn't always wear a face or a sin. Sometimes it just sits on your table, waiting. The second night, the gospel opened by itself. The air inside my cell grew heavy, thick like breath against glass. The candle refused to burn steady, as if the flame itself was afraid. The first line shimmered on the page, written in that impossible, moving ink. The word must enter the body to be believed. It looked obscene and sacred all at once. I whispered the sentence aloud, trembling half in prayer, half in defiance. The words felt different on my tongue. They tasted of copper and incense, and when I swallowed, it was as if the sound had weight, sinking through me. The candlelight flared. I thought I saw something beneath my skin, a faint shimmer, like veins filled with ink instead of blood. Then came the smell, sweet, metallic, wrong. I turned the page. The gospel was no longer a book. It was a mirror. The parchment reflected my face, but not my eyes. Those were black, bottomless. And in the reflection, my lips were moving, though I wasn't speaking. And he said, I made you of dust, but you made yourself of desire. I stumbled backward, the chair crashing behind me. But the voice didn't stop. It followed, low, intimate, echoing from the page and the walls alike. Do not read about the flesh, Miriam. Be the flesh. The candle died. Darkness swallowed the cell. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded against my ribs as if trying to escape. Then, out of nowhere, I felt something like fingers brushing my neck, tracing the outline of the collar I wore. They left warmth behind, not heat. Warmth, as if blood had remembered it was alive. When I reached for my throat, my fingers came away stained with ink. I rushed to the basin, scrubbing, but the marks wouldn't fade. Under the trembling moonlight, they looked like words written on my skin, words in a language that wasn't human. The next morning, I hid the gospel beneath my mattress, but every surface around me, my sheets, the wall, even the wooden cross by my bed had begun to bleed faint letters, phrases I didn't recognize. And when I knelt to pray, I realized the prayer wasn't mine anymore. I tried to say Ave Maria, but what came out was, The gospel of the flesh begins with you, Father Corbin. The confessor said. My voice sounded strange, lower, slower. He placed his hand on my forehead, and for a moment I thought I saw the ink pulse beneath my skin again, just once, like a heartbeat. That night, when I finally dared to look beneath the mattress, the gospel was waiting, its cover damp, its pages humming softly, as though breathing. It had written something new, just one sentence. Every scripture must be lived before it can be read, and below that my name again, but this time, the ink was red. Asterisk, asterisk, capitula 3. The Virgin's chapter. By the third night, sleep had become a stranger. The gospel no longer waited for me to open it. Its whispers came even through the wood of my desk, through my prayers, through my pulse. I began to hear the soft scrape of letters forming when I closed my eyes, as if someone were writing on the inside of my skull. That morning, one of the novices was missing. Sister Chelene, 17, bright as morning, her faith still unbruised. The other nun said she had gone to the orchard before dawn, but when the bell tolled for prime, she hadn't returned. Before anyone said a word, I knew. Because the night before, the gospel had shown me an illustration, a drawing that hadn't been there before, a young nun kneeling before an altar, her head tilted back, her hands folded as if in prayer. Around her, candles burned in a perfect circle, and from her throat flowed a single thread of black ink. The caption beneath read, "The Virgin's chapter." The others found her body near the old well by Vespers. I didn't have to see to believe it, but I did see because the mother Capitulos Confessions, written by no hand. They said the convent had gone quiet out of respect for Sister Chelene, but I knew the truth. It was the kind of silence that grows when the walls start listening. 3 nights after her burial, Father Corbin reopened the confessional. He wanted to remind us that sin still had ears willing to forgive. But when I entered, forgiveness felt different. The booth smelled of damp wood and old paper. My breath fogged against the thin wooden screen separating us. His voice was low, measured, familiar. "Speak, child," he said. "Unburden your soul." I opened my mouth to confess about the gospel, the words, the death. But something stopped me. Not fear, something else. A presence, waiting. Behind the screen, I heard the faint sound of scratching, like a quill on parchment. "Are you writing this down?" I asked. He didn't answer. The scratching grew louder, faster, until it sounded like dozens of pens moving at once. My pulse quickened. "Father," then silence. When I stepped out, the other side of the confessional was empty. The door was still closed, but Father Corbin wasn't there. On the seat where he should have been lay his notebook, the one he used for penance records. Its pages were filled edge to edge in frantic handwriting. Only it wasn't his. Each page began the same way. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Different names, different secrets. The lust of Sister Agnes, the jealousy of Mother Superior, the hunger of the young novices who dreamed of the world beyond the gates. But the strangest part, the ink was still wet. And at the very bottom of the last page, beneath the final confession, was mine. "Forgive me, Father, for I have seen the word move, and I no longer believe it is holy." I hadn't written it, but it was in my handwriting. That night, the confessional began to breathe. I was passing through the chapel when I heard it, a rhythmic pulsing creak, like lungs dragging in air. I turned, the booth's curtain shifted, though no one was inside. Then the sound began again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I forced myself to look. The small slit in the wood glowed faintly, as if light was leaking from inside. I reached out and a piece of parchment slid through the opening. On it, fresh ink, my name, then another, and another, parchments spilling from the confessional like the booth was vomiting since too heavy to hold. Each one carried a new confession signed by people who were still alive, people sleeping in their cells at that very moment. But they weren't written in ink anymore. They were written in blood. I backed away, heart hammering, until I hit the altar. And there, open once again, was the gospel waiting, its pages turned by unseen hands. Stopping on a new verse, "The confessions of the living are written by the dead, and the dead write with the blood of the faithful." I screamed for help, but the convent was silent. Only the sound of scratching remained, and somewhere inside that darkness, a voice whispered, almost tenderly, "Keep confessing, Miriam. I'm not done writing you yet." Capitulo were the sermon that heard her by the 5th day. Prayer had turned into performance. We knelt, we crossed ourselves, we whispered the same words we no longer believed. The chapel had become a stage for fear, and I, unwillingly, its leading voice. Mother Superior demanded I read during morning mass. "Your voice brings calm," she said, her pale hands trembling as she handed me the gospel. But she didn't know, or maybe she did. The book felt warm in my palms. It pulsed like something alive, like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. When I opened it, the ink shimmered, rearranging itself with obscene grace. The verses that once spoke of grace and salvation now bled into something else, something deeper, darker still. I began to read, and the word entered the mouths of the faithful, and they spoke not to heaven, but to the one beneath. At first, no one reacted. The congregation murmured their prayers, heads bowed. But then, the echo began. They were repeating after me, line by line, word by word. It wasn't planned. Their voices fell into rhythm with mine. A strange harmony that didn't sound human, more like a chant pulled from the bottom of a well. The walls trembled, candles flickered, their flames bending toward the altar as though drawn to something unseen. I tried to stop, my lips froze. But the words kept coming, not from my throat, but from inside me. Blessed are those who are unmade, for they shall see what the living cannot bear. The sisters' eyes glazed over. Their lips moved in unison, mouths opening and closing like fish gasping for breath. And behind their chanting, I heard something else, a voice layered beneath theirs. Deep, slow, inhuman. It was using our mouths. Father Corbin stumbled forward, shouting, "Stop, this is blasphemy." But the gospel turned its pages by itself, faster and faster, as if feeding on the noise. The voice spoke again, not through me this time, but through him. His cry became a roar, his arms spread, his eyes rolled back white, and in that moment the entire chapel smelled of smoke and roses. Do not silence the word, it said through him. It has waited centuries to be heard again. The crucifix above the altar cracked, not from heat, from pressure, as if the weight of what we'd said was too much for wood to bear. The statue of Christ fell, its porcelain face shattering across the floor when the last piece hit the ground. The chanting stopped. The silence that followed was thick enough to drown in. Father Corbin collapsed, gasping. His lips were blackened, stained with the same ink that had bled through the Gospel's pages. When I touched his wrist, his pulse was gone, but his mouth kept moving, whispering. I leaned close, trembling. And through cracked lips, he spoke the words the Gospel had written that morning, the same verse I had read aloud. Only now, it ended with something new. The word has been heard. Now it will begin to listen. Capitulo, low ink in the veins. I thought the worst had already happened, that the gospel had done all it could, but sin has a way of deepening, of digging its nails into the soul until it becomes part of the flesh. After Father Corbin's death, the convent sealed the chapel. No more sermons, no more reading aloud. Yet every night, I could hear the pages of the gospel turning behind the locked doors, whispering like 1,000 moths beating their wings against glass. I started to feel different. It began as a small bruise on my wrist, a dark, perfect circle, like spilled ink. I thought it was from scrubbing floors, but the mark spread, branching into thin black lines that crawled up my arm. Veins. No words. When I looked closer, I saw tiny letters forming beneath the skin. They moved, rearranging themselves, rewriting me from the inside. At first it hurt, a searing pulse under the flesh, but soon the pain became something else. A warmth that wasn't mine. As if someone else's blood was coursing through me. Each night, I'd wake to find new verses etched along my arms, across my collarbone, down my ribs. Latin, sometimes English, sometimes something older, primal. And always the same refrain. The word became flesh. I tried to hide it. I wore sleeves even during prayer, but Sister Agnes saw one morning as I reached for my rosary. She gasped, dropped her beads, and fled the room as if I'd shown her a demon. By Vespers, everyone knew. They didn't call me Sister Miriam anymore. They called me the Living Gospel. That title sounded holy, but their eyes told another story. Twisted with horror. That night, Mother Superior came to my cell. She didn't speak at first. She simply sat, staring at the lines on my arms as they shimmered faintly in the candlelight. Then, with a trembling voice, she asked, "What does it want?" I told her the truth. "I think it wants to be alive." Her hand flew to her crucifix. "Blasphemy," she whispered, but her gaze stayed fixed on my skin. When she reached out to touch one of the verses, the candle flickered violently, and the letters shifted beneath her fingers, spelling a single word. "Believer," she screamed. The candle fell, and for a brief moment before the darkness swallowed us, I saw something impossible, the ink crawling from my arm to hers, spreading like a shadow, seeking new parchment. By dawn, she was gone. Her room stood empty, the walls covered in the same moving script. When I looked at myself in the mirror that morning, I realized it had gone too far. The whites of my eyes weren't white anymore. They were laced with fine black veins that pulsed in rhythm with my heart. And inside my chest, I could hear it. The faint, steady rustle of pages turning with every beat. The gospel was no longer in the chapel. It was inside me. And when I pressed my palm to my heart, I felt the ink moving still, writing. You are not reading the word anymore, Miriam. You are becoming it. Capitulati, the voice behind the verses, it began with whispers beneath my heartbeat. Not thoughts, not prayers. Something older threaded into the rhythm of my blood. For days I tried to ignore it. I recited psalms until my lips went dry, pressed crucifixes to my skin until the metal left bruises. But no matter what I did, the voice kept rising, slow, patient, like a tide returning to shore. It didn't sound like God. It sounded like memory. The first time it spoke clearly, I was standing in the garden. The night smelled of rain and roses that had long forgotten sunlight. A chill wind brushed the trees, and I heard it, a low murmur from within me, vibrating through the ribs, echoing through the marrow. At last, it whispered, a tongue worthy of the word. I froze. Who are you? I managed to whisper back, though I wasn't sure if I spoke aloud or only thought the question. I am what was erased, it said, the apostle they buried in silence. My pulse quickened. There were only 12. The voice laughed softly like parchment tearing. There were 13. But I wrote the gospel they feared, the one that told them what they were. As it spoke, the ink under my skin began to move again, shifting into new verses that burned cold. I watched as words appeared across my forearm. The forgotten word becomes flesh to finish what heaven abandoned. Why me? I whispered, because you listened, because your faith cracked just enough to let me in. The garden lights flickered. I felt something move through me, not possession, not pain, a presence, vast and electric, wearing my body like a borrowed robe. You think you're the first, it said. Every century, the word seeks a vessel, but most are too blind, too faithful. You opened your eyes. You read me. I fell to my knees, clutching my head. The air pulsed with unseen wings, the scent of burnt myrrh thickening. My voice broke. If you are holy, prove it. The answer came like thunder wrapped in silk. Holiness is only what survives the fire, and then image, not visions, memories that weren't mine. An ancient monastery collapsing in flame, a scribe chained to an altar writing with his own blood, a choir singing in a tongue that made the stars flicker. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the ground, the sky heavy with storm. My fingers were stained black. The grass beneath me burned in the shape of a symbol I'd never seen, a circle split by a cross turned upside down. The voice spoke again, softer now, almost tender. You will write the last gospel, Miriam. The world is ready to read it. I tried to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't mine. It was a chorus. A dozen voices layered into one, reciting the same words the gospel had whispered since the beginning, and the word looked upon its vessel, and saw that it was good. When silence finally returned, I realized something horrifying. The voice hadn't faded. It was breathing with me. Capítulo 8. The apostle's kiss, the first time I felt it. I thought I was imagining it. A brush against my eyelids, light as a feather but hotter than candle flame. I had been kneeling before the altar, the gospel open in my lap, ink pulsing beneath my skin like a heartbeat not my own. The chapel was silent, or so I thought, but the air shifted around me, trembling with a presence I could not see. Do not fear me, Miriam, whispered the voice inside me. I have come to teach you. I shivered. My hands clutched the leather-bound book, but the words on the page were no longer stationary. They rose, curling like smoke, wrapping around my fingers, climbing my arms. And then the sensation appeared again, a kiss, impossibly soft, yet piercing. Brushing across my closed eyelids, I gasped and opened my eyes. The chapel was empty. Only the shadows remained, stretching and bending as if they had a life of their own. The voice chuckled, not inside my mind this time, but through the air itself, curling around my ears, settling into the bones of my chest. Do you feel me now? It said. I am the apostle you cannot see, the one who was erased, and I have waited centuries to meet a vessel like you. I tried to speak, but my lips betrayed me. Words poured out in a language I did not know, syllables vibrating with a strange resonance, like music that belonged to another realm. My body quivered, unable to stop. And then I saw it, not with my eyes, but with my awareness. A shadow darker than darkness pressed itself against me. It was neither solid nor entirely empty, and when it leaned closer, I felt the kiss again, gentle, lingering, threading desire and command through my very nerves. You are mine to teach, it whispered. Every verse you write, every prayer you utter, I will feel. Every heartbeat will be ours. I tried to pull back, to resist, but the gospel burned beneath my palms. The ink moved in jagged ecstatic lines, spelling words on my skin, across my arms, down to my fingertips. The word is no longer on paper. It is in flesh. It is in blood. It is in her. My chest heaved. I pressed the book to my face, inhaling the scent of old leather and ink. The kiss returned, this time lingering on my lips, leaving a metallic taste that was neither sweet nor bitter, but utterly addictive. The chapel seemed to breathe with me. Candles flared, shadows twisted, and I realized the statues lining the walls, the Virgin, the saints, even the angels were leaning just slightly toward me, watching, waiting. "Do not fear what you cannot see," the apostle whispered. "I will show you what is holy, and what the world fears." And in that moment, I understood the truth I had been trying to deny. The gospel was no longer a book. The apostle was no longer invisible, and I was no longer just Miriam. I was the vessel. He had kissed me awake. Asterisk. Capítulo 9. The miracles that sold him. Up in. They started as whispers in the town square. Rumors at first, about strange things happening near the convent. A blind man who stumbled into the chapel and walked out seeing. A child whose body had been limp with fever for days, now running barefoot through the courtyard, laughing, eyes wild with something brighter than joy. I didn't do these things, at least, not willingly, but the gospel did. Ever since the apostle's kiss, I had been different. When I touched the book, the ink did not merely move, it breathed. When I prayed, the air grew heavy, as if invisible hands were pressing against it. And sometimes, when my lips formed words I did not understand, the walls themselves trembled, and the candles flickered in unison like 1,000 startled eyes. That morning, as I walked through the convent's outer hall, the doors swung open on their own. The villagers flooded in, clutching rosaries, icons, even old scraps of cloth. They pressed toward me like moths to flame, muttering words of desperation. "Heal my son, save my husband, let my baby breathe." Their cries climbed the walls until they seemed to echo from the rafters. I backed away, clutching the book to my chest. The ink pulsed, hot as blood. My mouth began to move without my permission. The words that came out were not Latin, nor Spanish, nor any tongue I knew. They rolled from my throat like thunder over a black sea. The crowd fell silent. A faint light spilled from the book, spilling across the stone floor like water. That the first miracle happened in front of me. An old woman, bent double by age, dropped her cane. Her back straightened, her face smoothed. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered gracias. Over and over, I staggered backward. The light pulsed again. Another man screamed as his twisted leg uncoiled. A baby coughed once and then began to cry, strong, clear, alive. But the light didn't stop. It grew, spreading, crawling up the walls, illuminating the crucifix until Christ's carved eyes seemed to glisten. The villagers gasped and fell to their knees. Some began to chant my name, Miriam. I tried to tell them I wasn't doing this, that it wasn't me. But the voice the apostle whispered over my thoughts, silencing them like a hand over a mouth. "The world has forgotten the true word. You will remind them, even if it terrifies them." Outside, bells rang with no one pulling their ropes. Birds fell silent. The light from the book flickered like a heartbeat. And then, just as suddenly, the miracles stopped. The crowd stared at me in a silence heavier than any prayer. And I realized, from the look in their eyes, that they were no longer grateful. They were afraid. And so was I. Capítulo 10. T. Bishop arrives at midnight. T. Night was thick with wind, as though the heavens themselves were holding their breath. I had barricaded myself in my cell, the gospel clutched against my chest, the ink beneath my skin pulsing like a second heartbeat. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper of the candle flame a threat. Then the bells rang, not the soft, measured tolls of vespers, but loud, urgent, insistent. The sound echoed through the halls like hammers against stone. A carriage rolled up the gravel path, splintering the silence. Torchlight danced against the convent walls, and with it came figures in black robes, adorned with the gold embroidery of authority. Bishop Marlowe had arrived. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. He simply entered, flanked by acolytes holding crucifixes and silver censers. Smoke poured from the censers, curling like fingers seeking something it had been sent to destroy. "Miriam," his voice boomed, cold and controlled, carrying through the empty halls. "Step away from the altar. Step away from the word." I did not move. The gospel throbbed in my hands. The ink beneath my skin glowed faintly, and I could feel the apostle pressing close, whispering through the blood in my veins. "Do not fear him," it hissed. "He is blind to what he cannot read." The bishop's eyes narrowed. He raised a silver cross high. The air thickened. I could hear the subtle shift, as if the very fabric of reality had paused to watch. By the authority of the church, I command the word to cease. I tried to reply, but my voice was gone. Instead, the book opened itself, pages flapping in a silent frenzy. Words rose into the air, forming letters of light that hovered and swirled around me, spelling a message that made my pulse stutter. Authority is meaningless before what was written before man's hand. The bishop's face paled. He stepped closer, chanting in Latin, swinging the censer with desperate rhythm. The smoke thickened, twisting into forms, faces, hands, whispers of prayers gone wrong. Candles exploded in flame, throwing shadows like jagged teeth across the walls. And then it spoke. Not the gospel this time, not the book. The apostle's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, layered over my own heartbeat, resonating in the walls, the floor, the air itself. You may fear the word, bishop, but it fears no one. It chooses. I felt it press against me, the kiss on my eyelids, warmer, urgent, almost violent. The ink under my skin flared, spreading like a river of black fire. I could see the bishop's gold embroidery curling and blackening where the light touched it, his hands trembling against the cross. By the time the carriage left, the chapel was silent again. But the bishop was gone, or so the sisters whispered in the morning. No one had seen him leave. Only the scorched mark of a cross remained etched on the altar floor, and I understood the battle had been fought, but the gospel had chosen, and I was still its vessel. Capitula 11. The ink spreads beyond walls bidon. The world outside the convent had begun to change. It started small, letters appearing on the market stalls, etched into the stones of the village square, curling like vines of black smoke. People noticed, but no one could explain it. Some thought it a trick of the wind. Others blamed children with coal or ink, but I knew better. The gospel had left the walls. I tried to warn the sisters. It's not just here anymore, I said, but they wouldn't listen. Fear had wrapped them tight. Their eyes followed every shadow, but they refused to see the truth I was living inside me. I stepped outside into the morning fog. The cobblestones were alive with black veins. Each crack in the pavement pulsed, shimmering with ink that moved as if it were breathing. Words formed and dissolved faster than I could read them. The word must be seen to be believed. The word will find its reader. The vessel must go where the ink flows. I looked up and saw the villagers gathering, drawn to the moving script. Their faces were pale, their mouths open in awe and terror. A man touched the ground, and the letters rose along his arm, spreading like a fever through his veins. He screamed. I realized then the truth. The gospel was no longer confined to paper or skin. It was contagious, alive, seeking hosts beyond the convent. I ran to the edge of the village, desperate to stop it. The air was thick with the smell of ink and iron. The apostle whispered in my veins, excited, urgent, impatient. Do not hide it. Do not resist. The word will be read. Everywhere I looked, the ink moved. Across walls, through doors, into the air. It seeped through cracks, curling like smoke into the houses. People screamed as letters appeared on their hands, arms, even their faces. They read themselves now, the voice said, and they will write you back. A child ran past me, pointing at her reflection in a puddle. Her eyes were black at the edges, pupils glowing. The water rippled, forming words on the surface. The vessel is ready. The villagers recoiled, but some approached anyway, hypnotized. They traced the words with trembling fingers. Their veins began to darken with the moving ink, spreading faster than fear, faster than understanding. I felt it in me, too. My own skin was alive with script, words I had not yet read, letters forming and fading in rhythm with my heartbeat. The gospel had become something beyond comprehension, and I knew the final stage had begun. The world outside the convent was no longer safe. It belonged to the word now, and I, Miriam, was its chosen vessel. The apostle whispered one last thing before the fog swallowed the village completely. Soon, every eye will read the word, and every hand will write what cannot be erased. I clenched the book to my chest, feeling the pulse of ink, the heartbeat of something ancient and unstoppable. The word was no longer just ours. It was everywhere. Capitulo Shara, the last mass before the end. The convent was no longer a sanctuary. It was a cathedral of shadows, a place where ink dripped from walls, ceilings, even the air itself. Candles burned black, their smoke curling in slow, deliberate patterns, spelling messages that I could feel in my bones before I could read them. I knew it was time. The apostle whispered through my veins, faster now, urgent, eager. Its voice had become a roar beneath my skin. The final reading is upon us, Miriam. Every eye will see, every soul will bend. I climbed the steps to the chapel. Every pew was empty. Every shadow leaned toward the altar. The air pulsed with expectation. The gospel waited. its pages fluttering like the wings of 1,000 unseen birds. I opened it. The ink shimmered, forming words I did not know I could speak. My voice trembled, but when it emerged, it carried power I had never known. Hear me, all who dwell within these walls. Hear me, all who would not see. The word has chosen flesh, and the flesh has become word. The air thickened, the walls shivered, candles flickered violently as the black smoke rose, coiling into forms. Angels, demons, I could not tell. The shadows leaned closer, and for the first time, I realized that the ink was no longer moving only on paper or skin. It was moving through the air, invisible threads stretching into the world beyond the chapel doors. I glanced at the congregation empty pews, but their absence did not matter. I could feel them, the villagers, drawn by the miracles, their veins pulsing with the ink that had spread beyond the convent. Their fear, their awe, their surrender all flowed into me, and I read it as clearly as any line in the gospel. Every sinner, every saint, every soul, I read aloud, my lips trembling, will write the word before they sleep. The apostle pressed closer. I could feel its lips against my temple, hot and insistent. My heart ached as the ink inside me flared, spreading faster, covering my arms, chest, even my face with living script. A thunderous noise shook the roof. The statues lining the walls groaned and shifted as if waking from centuries of silence. Cracks spread in the stone, the floor beneath the altar trembling. Do you see now? The voice whispered, inside and outside me at once. Do you understand the power of the word made flesh? I did. And then the gospel lifted itself from my hands. Pages turned violently, the air around them thrumming with the weight of scripture alive. The words flew from the pages, across the chapel, beyond the convent, touching the village, the sky, the earth itself. Everywhere the ink touched, reality bent. Screams of awe and terror echoed, mingled with whispers of the word. The apostle's presence pressed against me fully now, no longer a whisper, but a storm, a living, breathing being fused with my own flesh. I realized it then. There would be no end. Not for the word, not for me, not for the world. The last mass had begun, and it would never finish. Capitulo Shual, the gospel that became the world. The world had become a manuscript. Every mountain, every river, every trembling leaf pulsed with living ink. Shadows bent and twisted to form sentences, and the wind carried verses across the oceans. Humanity was no longer reading the gospel, it was the gospel. Its blood, its breath, its flesh inked into every corner of existence. I stood at the center of the village, now unrecognizable, the cobblestones beneath my feet crawling with writhing letters. The apostle's presence, fierce and intimate, pressed against my every nerve, and for the first time, I felt complete. The final chapter awaits, it whispered, its voice threading through my veins. And you, Miriam, are the pen. I raised the gospel, but it was no longer a book. The leather cover had melted into my hands, pages fusing into my flesh, letters streaming along my arms, across my chest, into my heart. Every heartbeat sent waves of script into the world, rewriting reality with an unstoppable rhythm. From the sky, clouds formed sentences, etched in storm and lightning. Oceans rose, revealing words written in foam that spoke to every living being below. Cities trembled, forests whispered, and even the stars in the night sky pulsed with the gospel's verses. I could feel them all, the villagers, the beasts, the elements themselves, reading, writing, responding. Every action, every breath, every thought became a line of scripture, feeding the living word into existence. Do you see? The apostle asked. The word is no longer confined. It is everything, and it chose you to bring it fully to life. I shivered. My own reflection in a pool of black ink showed my eyes rimmed with letters, pupils glowing with words. My voice rose, unstoppable, chanting verses I had never learned, singing lines that belonged to creation itself. Mountains shifted, rivers curved into sentences, forests bent into paragraphs. Humanity cried out, some in awe, some in terror, but all obeyed the pulse of the gospel flowing through the veins of the world. The apostle's kiss burned on my eyelids, sealing my awareness with an ecstasy I could neither resist nor escape. And then, I understood the final truth. The gospel was never meant to be read by one. It was never meant to be confined to paper, to ink, to human understanding, that it was life itself. It was everything, and now, through me, it had become complete. I whispered the last line, my lips trembling, the world holding its breath, and the word saw itself in all things. And it was written, and it was good. The apostle pressed close, a final kiss against my temple, and I felt the pulse of the universe sync with my own heartbeat. The villagers, or what they had become, bowed, eyes filled with living ink, reading, writing, obeying. And as the sun rose over a world now etched in scripture, I realized I was no longer Miriam. I was the Word. I was the gospel. I was the world itself, and nothing would ever be the same again.
Epilogue. After the ink silence, not the absence of sound, but the weight of it, a silence that hummed with the memory of every word ever written, every verse ever read, every heartbeat ever inked into the world. The world had changed, yet nothing had stopped. Mountains still whispered scripture. Rivers continued to curl into sentences. The sky shimmered with letters that no human eye could fully grasp. And beneath it all, I existed, no longer Miriam, no longer simply a vessel, but a living nexus of the word itself. I wandered through the remnants of the village. The houses, once familiar, now pulsed with moving script. Each stone a sentence, each shadow a paragraph. The villagers, some still recognizable, others entirely rewritten, paused as I passed, their inked eyes following me, reading, understanding, obeying. Some whispered my name, some merely hummed the verses that now defined them. "You are everywhere," the apostle whispered, a vibration beneath my skin, "and everywhere is you." I reached the chapel one last time. The altar had shifted. The stone floor had become a flowing manuscript. Letters rippling like water, candles burned with black flames, smoke curling into lines of invisible ink. I opened the gospel, though it no longer felt like a book. It was my body, my mind, my pulse, and yet it was everything else too. "What now?" I asked, though my voice was not only mine. "What now?" For the word, the apostle hummed, a resonance that filled the air, shook the trees, vibrated through the ground beneath me. Now, the word endures. Now, the word watches, reads, learns. It is complete in its incompleteness, infinite in its reach, and it will continue long after you are no longer necessary. I understood. The gospel had never needed me to survive. It had chosen me to become it, to witness the unfolding of something eternal. My consciousness intertwined with it, a lens through which the universe could read and rewrite itself. Yet I was also separate, a sentinel and a participant. I closed my eyes. Letters danced across my vision, flowing like rivers into every corner of the horizon. I felt the heartbeat of the world align with my own, each pulse a verse, each breath a chapter. And then, for the first time in centuries, there was a stillness, not silence, but a pause, a single line of ink stretching across the sky, simple, clear. "It is good." The apostle faded from my awareness, leaving only a lingering warmth, like a final kiss on the soul. And though it was gone, I knew it would never truly leave. I stepped outside, into a world both familiar and utterly alien. The wind carried whispers, the rivers hummed verses, the stars blinked letters in a language older than memory. I was no longer a reader, no longer a scribe. I was the Word, and the Word would never end.